Imagine this. You're about to take on an important project, master a new skill, or finally bring something you've started to its logical conclusion. But then, a real battle begins with your brain, which seems determined to find every possible distraction and pleasure. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to make yourself do something useful and meaningful, even when you know how important it is? Well, I'll just spend another half hour on social media, watch one more episode of my favorite show, and then I'll definitely start. Or maybe it's better to start tomorrow. This is Jane. She quit her job and became a freelancer. No boss, no strict work schedule, no disgruntled colleagues. Sounds like a dream, but the joy of a flexible work schedule didn't last long. First, I'll watch my favorite movie for just an hour, and then I'll work. Oh, after the movie, it's lunchtime, and I have a delicious piece of cake left. I'll browse social media, eat, and then start working right away. After a while, distracted by social media, Janet looked at the clock and realized it was already evening, and she felt tired. So she decided she would definitely work first thing in the morning. But that new tomorrow for Janet never seems to come, and the shows and social media keep getting more interesting and captivating. We all have a little bit of Janet in us in various situations. So why is it so hard to fight our weaknesses when we know how negatively they can impact our future? Why do some people have the motivation to tackle difficult tasks, studying, exercising, or working on their projects, while others find it hard even to start? How can we make difficult tasks easier and start doing them right away? To answer this question, we need to look at one of the key neurotransmitters, dopamine. We are used to calling dopamine the pleasure hormone, but in reality, dopamine is also responsible for anticipating pleasure. It is dopamine that gives us the motivation to start doing something. Even though our brain is a very smart machine, it is lazy, and if what we want to do doesn't bring a lot of immediate pleasure, there will be no motivation to do it. On the other hand, if an activity leads to a large release of dopamine, the motivation will be high. So, what activities release dopamine? Any activity that ultimately provides an immediate reward will give a burst of dopamine and motivation. Our brain is programmed to conserve energy. In an environment with limited resources like food and water, the brain has always chosen actions that require minimal effort with maximum benefit. Therefore, when faced with something difficult, our brain instinctively seeks easy and quick paths to satisfaction. For example, how can you resist your favorite cake? It's so delicious that even before you eat it, dopamine is already being released in anticipation of the pleasure. And even though you know it may harm your health and figure in the future, your brain gives you enough motivation to eat the cake and get pleasure at that moment. Our brain doesn't care whether you'll suffer from certain actions or not. If an action results in a dopamine reward and the brain understands this, you'll want to get it again and again. The problem is that the more cheap dopamine we get, the more tolerant we become. We become less sensitive to normal doses of dopamine, and normal life requires more and more of it. As a result, what used to make us happy no longer interests us as much, and the motivation to do certain things significantly decreases. Let's look at a simple example. Does a smoker know that smoking is harmful? Of course. Will that make them smoke less? Probably not. This is due to the release of an extremely high level of dopamine when smoking a cigarette. Our receptors get used to such high levels of dopamine, and it becomes the norm, which is why it's so hard for a smoker to quit. Due to a lack of dopamine, they become sluggish, irritable, and it seems that nothing brings joy except for cigarettes, and other ways to get dopamine don't work because they don't release as much of the pleasure hormone as cigarettes do. Unfortunately, tolerance doesn't only occur in smokers. All people addicted to large amounts of food, social media, movies and TV shows, gambling, alcohol, and video games experience the same thing: a high tolerance to dopamine and an inability to enjoy life with lower dopamine levels. So how do you break this vicious cycle and start enjoying life again? You need to do a dopamine detox. A dopamine detox doesn't mean giving up pleasures completely. It's a method of controlling and redirecting your efforts. Try temporarily giving up quick rewards and channel your energy into something that requires effort. You'll be surprised at how this changes your attitude toward difficult tasks. Choose a day when you'll avoid activities that trigger a high release of dopamine, allowing your receptors to recover. On this day, you need to avoid as many activities as possible that are associated with a high release of dopamine. No internet, junk food, music, movies, or video games. You also need to avoid stimulants such as energy drinks and coffee. This way, you should eliminate as many sources of quick dopamine as possible. But what can you do instead? Take walks in the fresh air, eat healthy food, read books, meditate, reflect on yourself, your life, and your plans for the future, and do boring but important tasks that you've been too lazy to do before. The idea behind a dopamine detox is that the receptors responsible for dopamine release gradually return to a normal state, and tasks that once seemed boring now become more interesting. This method of restoring normal dopamine levels can be difficult to follow. So if you find that you can't stick to such a detox for even a day, you can try a different approach. Choose 1-2 days a week and promise yourself to completely give up a specific thing that contains a high level of dopamine, such as video games, social media, junk food, etc. This tactic works very effectively. Try cutting out some activities for 1 day a week, and you'll be surprised at how your life will change and how you'll start doing the necessary but previously difficult things with pleasure. Gradually increase the number of days each week when you refuse quick gratification. Each day, it will become easier and easier to cope with dopamine dependence and start doing difficult tasks that you previously lacked the motivation to do. During experiments with dopamine detox, people found it easier to start doing work that previously caused them rejection and boredom. They achieved goals more quickly that had been unattainable for months or even years. Of course, it's not necessary to give up quick pleasures for a long time. Once you've done a dopamine detox and your dopamine levels have returned to normal, you can reintroduce quick dopamine into your life without fear. As long as you follow a simple rule. Luckily, after cleansing your brain, this rule will be easy to follow. First, do the work with a low dopamine level, and only then, closer to the evening, when you've done everything, you can reward yourself with some quick dopamine. The key is to do this after you've done the main and difficult tasks. Otherwise, you'll lose your motivation. Of course, you shouldn't reward yourself with alcohol or drugs, as these categories don't apply to dopamine detox. If you have problems with such addictions, you should seek help from a qualified professional. The practice of dopamine fasting has helped me and many others regain a zest for life, feel joy in simple things, and easily do boring but important tasks. The brain's reward system is in everyone and will always work. We can't hide from dopamine, and we don't need to. But it's up to us to decide whether to take control of our brain and pleasure hormones and live a happy life, or let hormones decide how we live our lives. The choice is ours. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. It will help more people see this video and start changing their lives for the better. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.